Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
You are begging the wrong person, maggots. Avernus scoffed at the elves who were doing their best to beg for their lives. If you don't grovel in front of my master and sincerely ask for forgiveness after I count to 10, I will start killing people. 1, 2, 3. Forgive us. We were wrong. Please, have mercy. We only wanted to protect our village from outsiders. It is the tradition in our village to not allow any race aside from elves to enter our village. Forgive us. Please, show us mercy. Avernus, who heard the elves plead for forgiveness, was instantly annoyed. They were not sincerely begging for forgiveness. Instead, they were indirectly telling their master that he was in the wrong and that they were simply upholding the traditions of their village. It seems that all of you still don't understand your situation, Avernus stated. I told you to sincerely beg for my master's forgiveness and not say excuses. Once again, Avernus unleashed his dragon's fear, and this time, he didn't hold back. All the elves in front of him started to puke and froth due to the extreme pressure that he was releasing. Even Amar wasn't spared from this. The Draculika's intention was clear. If they don't fall in line, he would force them to fall in line. I apologize for my disrespectful words, the guard captain, whom Lux named as villager, begged as he fought hard to suppress the fear that was bubbling inside his chest. I had eyes but failed to see your greatness. I was blinded by my pride. You forgot to say that my master is more handsome than any elf in this lowly village of yours. Also, make sure to mention how stupid you all are, and that you are lower than pigs, Avernus commented. Start from the beginning. I apologize. This lowly pig had been very disrespectful. Villager said as tears and snot flowed out from his eyes and nose. We were all stupid for not realizing your greatness. I have never seen someone as handsome as you, young master, in my entire life. Avernus nodded. Not bad. Now, all of you say the same thing as he did. If my master forgives you, then I will allow you all to live. However, make no mistake. You are going to compensate my master for your insolence. If he isn't happy with your hospitality, then I will make sure that no one else will experience your hospitality. Avernus had been an arrogant dragon ever since he was born. Of course, he had every right to be arrogant since he had the strength to back it up. He was also very happy because even though his master had remained a kind person, he had also changed to be someone who would not allow others to treat him as a doormat. Because of this, the Draculic was more than happy to do the dirty work for Lux and make everyone who dared to disrespect him understand that they were messing with the wrong person. All the elves repeated the first elf's words and asked for the half-elf's forgiveness over and over again. They even competed with each other on praising Lux's handsome looks, making the half-elf have a hard time preventing the corner of his lips from twitching. After nearly 30 minutes of this farce, the half-elf decided to forgive them for their transgressions. Can I now enter your village? Lux asked. Lightnovel, of course. Amar replied in a heartbeat. We will show you the hospitality of Moss Village. Please, follow us, Your Excellency. Amar was afraid that Lux might suddenly change his mind and punish them for being disrespectful to him. Although they indeed had a law that forbade any half-elf from entering their lands, that law didn't mean jack *t in the face of someone who had a calamity-ranked monster as his subordinate. Lux and Aurora entered the village with calm expressions on their faces. The first thing they saw were the treehouses that the elves used as their home. Although the designs were simple and couldn't be compared to the grand structures in the kingdom of Aspor Frieden, the houses had a rustic charm to them, making Lux feel as if a refreshing breeze was blowing past him. Although there were many houses that were built on the tops of the trees, Lux couldn't see any elves in the surroundings. This was completely understandable since Avernus had made his presence known, making the elves flee towards the shelters that they had prepared just in case their village was overrun by monsters. Just as Lux thought that he wouldn't see a single elf in the surroundings, he noticed an elf lady standing on the balcony of one of the biggest tree houses in the village. She looked like someone in her early 20s, which was very normal for the elves who had a very long lifespan. However, Lux stopped walking the moment his eyes landed on the elven lady, who was looking at him in disbelief. "Vincent," the elf lady muttered. "No, you're not him. Vincent is dead." The elf lady then jumped down from the treehouse and walked towards Lux as if she were in a trance. Without even asking for permission, she cupped Lux's face, which almost gave Amar and the guards a heart attack. They had barely escaped with their lives due to their disrespectful words towards the half-elf. But now, one of their people was touching his face without holding back. "Adeline, don't be disrespectful to our guests," Amar shouted. "Your Excellency, I am sorry. Adeline has not been feeling well for nearly 2 decades due to the loss of her child. She is a very good girl, but she can be eccentric at times. Please, forgive her if she offended you." Lux didn't say anything and simply allowed the elven lady, who had the same eye color as him, to touch his face. A moment later, her hands trembled as if she had come to a realization. "Your name," Adeline said softly as she looked at the handsome half-elf in front of her, who reminded her of the man she had loved 20 years ago. "What is your name?" Her hands still cupped the half-elf's face, but they were trembling, reflecting the emotions that were starting to stir inside her heart. "Lux," Lux replied as he gazed at the beautiful elf, who had cried bitterly as she lovingly held her dead baby a long time ago. "My name is Lux." Amar raised his cup to honor their VIP guests, who had come to stay in their humble village for a few days. As much as they wanted to make Lux leave, none of them dared to actually bring it up, fearing that the Draculika's wrath would descend upon them. "I call for a toast for Lux's and Aurora's long and happy life," Amar said as he raised his wine cup. "To friendship. To friendship." The elders of Moss Village also joined the small banquet, which they held to honor the half-elf and the beautiful young lady who accompanied him. Aurora sat on Lux's left side, while Adeline sat on his right. The elf lady didn't hesitate to put food on Lux's plate, and the half-elf didn't make any move to stop her from doing so. However, Lux and Aurora were both surprised. Both of them thought that elves didn't eat meat, and only settled for fruits and other edible plants in the forest. When Lux voiced his thoughts, Adeline smiled and told him that the only time that elves ate only fruits and edible plants was when there were no animals to hunt in the forest. She couldn't tell why she was feeling strongly attracted to Lux. Of course, the attraction wasn't anything romantic. But truth be told, she was fighting the strong urge to hug him and hold him close. Adeline felt like the one person missing in her life had finally appeared, and she also felt that she was both familiar and unfamiliar to him. When she heard that his name was Lux, the young elf remembered the time when she was holding her dead baby by the riverside. She had not been able to give her newborn anything except for a name, which was Lux, a name that means light. After her lover, Vincent, had died, the only proof of their love that remained was her baby. However, as if fate found her union with a human laughable, that one thing she held sacred was also taken away from her. The light of her life was snuffed out before he could even open his eyes to see the world he was born into. Now, seeing a half-elf, who looked exactly like her departed lover, made her feel as if the last puzzle in her heart had fallen into place. Lux's eyes, which resembled her own, looked at her kindly. Adeline was very sensitive when it came to the gazes of the people around her. Because of this, she also felt the affection that the half-elf was hiding in his subtle glances towards her. She didn't mind this, because she was doing the same. Of course, Amar, who had known Adeline since she was young, was also giving Lux some sidelong glances. He really looks like Vincent, Amar thought. He also has Adeline's eyes. His name is also Lux. But could this just be a coincidence? That child was certainly dead back then. He had known who Adeline's lover was and even repeatedly reminded her that falling in love with a human was a mistake. The village head of Moss Village was well aware of the laws of the Elven Kingdom that didn't tolerate the existence of half-elves and barred them from stepping inside their domain. Of course, even if the Elf King were to suddenly make a surprise visit to their village, this law that he had decreed would have no effect whatsoever. Lightnovel Amar was certain that if the Elf King were to meet Lux, the ruler of the elves would have no choice but to smile and commend the half-elf for his good looks. Only fools would dare to anger an existence that could wipe out the entire elven kingdom from the face of the Solais. Lux, you said that you and this beautiful young lady are adventurers, Amar said. Do you mind if I ask you where you came from? I mind, Lux replied, making Amar's smile almost crack. Lux, where did you come from? Adeline asked as she held Lux's hand. I came from Wildguard Stronghold, Lux answered with a smile. I was raised there by my grandma since I was a baby. Amar almost choked after seeing this scene. When he asked the same question, the half-elf didn't even bother to give him a proper answer. Yet, when Adeline was the one who asked the question, he answered immediately and even gave some additional information about his background. Discrimination much? Lux didn't know that Amar was fuming in his heart. But even if he did, he wouldn't care about it either. For him, the village head of Moss Village wasn't important. He only came to see the mother of the body he had taken over, giving him a chance to live in this world as Lux von Kaiser. What is your grandma's name? And is she human? Adeline inquired. Yes, my grandma is a human, Lux replied. Her name is Vera. Is that so? Then what is your relationship with Aurora? Are the two of you perhaps lovers? Yes, she is my future wife. Isn't she a beauty? Adeline nodded and looked at Aurora fondly. She is indeed very beautiful. When will the two of you get married? Please invite me. I want to become the godmother of your baby. Marriage? Perhaps 2 to 3 years from now, Lux answered. And of course, I would love for you to attend my marriage. In fact, aside from Aurora, I have other fiancés as well. If possible, I want you to meet them if there is an opportunity. Adeline blinked once and twice as she looked at Lux in surprise. You have other fiancés aside from Aurora? Adeline asked. Yes, Lux replied. Right now, I have 8 fiancés. Right now? You mean there is a possibility that there will be more? No comment. Adeline rubbed her forehead as if this revelation was giving her a headache. You're like your fath, my deceased lover, Adeline said sadly. That guy was capable of making any lady fall for him. When the two of us were traveling, I lost count of the number of women who tried to join us on our journey. Fortunately, he was madly in love with me, so he didn't even bother to look at them. What is your lover like, Emo, Lady Adeline? Lux asked. Can you tell me more about him? First, don't call me Lady Adeline. Adeline pouted. Just call me Mom or Adeline. Okay, Adeline, Lux replied with a smile. For now, he held back in calling her Mom since things might get complicated. The young elf narrowed her eyes. For a brief moment, Lux sensed the elf lady's dissatisfaction with not being called Mom by him. Very well, I will tell you about Vincent, Adeline said before drinking all the wine inside her wine cup. But I will only tell you and Aurora. Come to my house. Adeline didn't even bother waiting for Lux's reply and grabbed his hand. She then dragged him away and brought him to her house. The story that she was about to tell him was quite sensitive, so Adeline didn't want others to hear it. Once her guests were properly seated inside her living room, Adeline began her tale. 25 years ago, the two of us met in an auction house. He was a guest, while I was one of the slaves that was being auctioned that day. Aurora held Lux's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. She could sense that Lux's killing intent spiked up a bit, so she wanted to help him calm down. Lux returned her gesture and thanked her through their guild chat. The two of them then continued to listen to Adeline's story. A story of how an elf fell in love with a human, and how the two of them became one. In a black market within the Finn Kingdom. Everyone, the moment that all of you have been waiting for has arrived, the auctioneer enthusiastically said with a smile on his face. I present to you an elven beauty who nearly died after facing an Argonaut-ranked monster near the border of the Vahan Empire. Fortunately, one of our merchants came across her and managed to save her life. If not for him, we would not be able to auction off this beautiful lady who had just turned 20 a month ago. As if to prove that he was telling the truth, one of the staff took a blue crystal from his pocket and placed it on top of the elf's head. A projection then appeared in front of everyone and the number 20 was shown. The artifact was something that most people used to determine the bone age of a person. Appearances could be deceiving, especially when it came to elves, high rankers, and other races who aged slowly. Seeing that the elf was indeed young, the buyers became more interested in purchasing her. I guarantee that she is still pure, so her price will be set more expensive than usual, the auctioneer stated. I'm sure that all of you are looking forward to breaking this slave and making her your loyal servant. So, without further delay, bidding starts at 1 million gold. 2 million. 3 million. 5 million. The rich and powerful nobles from the Finn Kingdom, who regularly participated in this underground auction hosted by crime syndicates, tried to outbid one another. Adeline was currently under a spell that prevented her from forming any thoughts inside her head. Because of this, she wasn't aware that everyone inside the auction was fighting to become her new master, to whom she would offer her body and heart for the rest of her life. 30 million. A voice radiating confidence and power silenced everyone inside the auction house. Those who were trying to outbid each other just now looked in the direction where the one who bid 30 million to purchase the elf was seated in a leisurely manner. The young man seemed to be around 15 years old. He had short red hair and eyes that made everyone who looked at him feel as if he could see everything, including their soul. "30 million, the auctioneer stuttered. Any other bidders? Clearly, even he was affected by the young man's charismatic gaze, making him lose his composure for a brief moment. Going once. Going twice. Sold. The young man smirked before standing up from his seat. The elf was the final item in the auction house, so there was no need to stay any longer. Everyone looked at him with envy. After all, it was rare for a young elf to be found in the auction house. Because of this, everyone wanted to do their best to make her their possession. However, it was simply impossible to fight against the young man. The reason? Because he was the bastard son of the king of the kingdom of Finn. Although he was a bastard, his father was still a king, making it hard for them to fight him in the open. In the back room of the auction house, when Adeline opened her eyes, she found herself staring at a handsome young man who was looking at her with a smile on his face. "Good. You have finally regained your consciousness," the young man said as he approached Adeline, who was still trying to understand what was happening around her. She could tell that the young man was younger than her at a glance, which made her frown. "Do you understand my language?" the young man asked and then raised 3 fingers in front of the elven beauty. "How many fingers do you see?" Adeline's wits returned to her slowly. However, once she finally recalled what had happened to her, she immediately raised her hand to touch her neck. At that moment, she felt a cool metallic sensation on her hand, confirming her worst fears. "A slave collar," Adeline muttered absent-mindedly. She then looked at the young man in front of her who was busy groping her right breast while muttering things that made Adeline's cheeks burn in embarrassment. "Oh my God! Why is this so soft?" the young man exclaimed. "Are all breasts like this? Why is this thing at the center becoming firm? I wonder what it tastes like." Just as the young man was about to put Adeline's breast inside his mouth, the elf was no longer able to hold back and pushed the young man away, making the latter fall on his butt and cry out in pain. Fortunately, the floor was covered in carpet, so the young man didn't get hurt that much. "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" the young man complained as he stood up. "Do you not know who I am? I am your master." Adeline ignored the young man and looked at her surroundings. She needed to escape no matter what and return to Solais. I guess you still don't understand your place," the young man said in an arrogant tone. "Since you don't recognize me as your master, I will make you recognize me as one." The young man then pointed at Adeline with a smirk on his face. "Kneel," the young man ordered. Adeline, who had just been given an order, walked towards the young man until she was only 2 feet away from him. The young man stared defiantly at the elf, who was a head taller than him. He had given her the order to kneel, and he was looking forward to making her understand her place. However, instead of kneeling, Adeline raised her hand and slapped his face, making the young man cry out in pain. "Just who are you ordering to kneel, huh?" Adeline grabbed the young man's robes and lifted him up. "A mere apostle like you dares to order around a ranker like me? Just who between us doesn't understand their place?" The young man struggled to escape from Adeline's grip, But no matter what he did, he was unable to escape her grasp. After a full minute of futile struggling, the young man sighed and looked at the defiant elf with a pout. Huh. I guess ordering you while the slave collar is deactivated won't work, the young man said. Very well, since you don't want to obey me when I'm being nice, I will stop being nice. Adeline suddenly felt the collar on her neck tingle, making her eyes widen in shock. Let's try this again from the start, the young man said with a mischievous smile on his face. Kneel. This time, Adeline felt a strong, compelling force for her to obey her master's command. She slowly placed the young man down before kneeling in front of him. The young man then placed his finger under the elf's chin and slowly raised her head, making her look at him. Let me introduce myself, the handsome young man said with a smile. My name is Vincent, and from this moment onwards, you will protect me from those who wish to end my life. I hope we get along well. I forgot to ask. What is your name again? Adeline, Adeline replied in a heartbeat. My name is Adeline. Good. Vincent then crouched down and planted a kiss on Adeline's forehead. By my name, I hereby declare that 5 years from now, the slave collar on your neck will break, and you will regain your freedom. Until then, you are to protect me. Do I make myself clear, Adeline? Yes, Adeline replied as she looked at the young man, whom she was forced to serve for 5 years. Whether she would be able to protect his life or not, Adeline would only know the day the slave collar on her neck broke into pieces. Vincent was a troublesome teenager, Adeline said with a sad smile on her face. But as I spent more time with him, I realized that he had two very different personas, the Vincent that the public knew and the Vincent that only I knew in private. Outside the privacy of his room, he was a cold and indifferent person. He looked like someone who completely held the world in his hands. His confidence and charisma made those who saw him treat him as if he was a general who had successfully finished many campaigns. Because of this, he was fairly popular among the nobles, and some would even go as far as gifting him with treasures and gold in order to get on his good side. Lightsfell Adeline paused as a sigh escaped her lips. That was a mask he wore to make those who ridiculed him and aimed to take his life think twice before making a move, Adeline stated. Even I was surprised whenever I accompanied him outside as his bodyguard. Although he was younger than me by 5 years, his back looked broader and bigger than any man I have seen in my life. But his other persona, when we are alone, was like a naive child who knew nothing of the world. This time, a sweet smile appeared on Adeline's lips as if she relived one of the happiest days of her life. He was adventurous, curious, and at times, this curiosity is focused on the anatomy of the opposite gender, Adeline said. In short, he was a pervert behind closed doors, Lux said. Are you sure his name was Vincent and not Rudius? Adeline shook her head. His surname was not Grerat. I see. Lux nodded in understanding. Please continue. The beautiful elf giggled before nodding her head. I watched him grow up from a naive young man to someone who was less ignorant of the world, Adeline said. During that time, I protected him from the assassins sent by his brothers. They were jealous of the attention he was getting from their father. Vincent already expected such things to happen, so he decided to buy me at the auction house to become his personal guard. You see, he was very paranoid and trusted only a handful of individuals. Since I was a slave, he gave me unconditional trust, as well as love. I already mentioned that he was very popular with the nobles, and with his looks, he was also very popular with the ladies. Of course, I didn't fall in love with him at first, but after 3 years of being with him, I realized that he had already wormed his way inside my heart. When he turned 18, his father asked him what kind of gift he wanted. Do you know what he asked for? Lux shook his head. He really had no idea what someone like Vincent would ask a king for as a gift. He asked his father to allow him to marry me, Adeline said, and a faint tinge of red could be seen creeping up her face. He did this inside the royal ballroom while he was celebrating his birthday. Of course, I was shocked, because at that time, I was still a slave, and the black collar on my neck proved that. At first, his father thought that Vincent was just joking since that was what he was like. Vincent liked to joke around whenever he was outside. But this time, He wasn't joking. He was serious. The king asked him if this was what he truly wanted, and he said yes. The king then took a look at me before reluctantly nodding his head. He then gave Vincent a choice: to stay with me and be disowned, or leave me a slave and remain a prince. To everyone's surprise, he chose to be with me in a heartbeat, surprising even his own father. He was only 18 at that time, no longer a boy, but not yet a man. After choosing me, the king sighed and disowned him then and there. His Majesty also ordered that the celebration be stopped. But just as everyone was about to leave the room, Vincent asked the king a question with a serious expression on his face. Lux and Aurora, who were now invested in the story, waited for Adeline to finish what she was going to say. This is what Vincent said to his father, who had disowned him in front of everyone, Adeline said with a solemn expression on her face. Can I at least take away the cake? Lux and Aurora blinked once, then twice, after hearing Adeline's words. The beautiful elf covered her lips as her body shook while holding back her laughter. A minute later, she finally regained her composure and smiled. The king got so angry that he lifted the cake and threw it on his bastard son, covering his entire body with cake. Adeline smiled. All the guests laughed after seeing this scene, and to my surprise, Vincent laughed alongside them. Perhaps the laughter was so infectious that even the king laughed with everyone. That was how his 18th birthday ended. He chose to end it on a happy note instead of a sad one. He left the royal palace still covered in cake. Since he was disowned, he lost all the possessions he had that day, yet he still smiled at me and said, "At least, I still have you, Adeline. You're far more precious than all the treasures in this world combined." That night, I knew then and there that I truly loved him. I took him away from that place until we stumbled across a river. Both of us bathed, and I helped him remove the cake that covered his entire body. And then, he embraced me, and I willingly embraced him back. Back then, I thought that, since it was his birthday, I wanted to give him a gift, something very precious to me, and that was myself. I didn't know if it was because of the remnants of the cake or not, but his kisses were sweet, just like the rest of his body. Although it was my first time, I didn't feel any pain because of the overflowing love and happiness that I was feeling at that time. Perhaps that is also the night when I started to conceive. You see, elves are not like humans. In the eyes of our race, I was still a child. When Vincent was 18, I was only 23. Because of this, the chances of me getting pregnant were slim. Our gestation period is also long. Usually, it takes anywhere between 1 to 5 years for our gestation period to end. Whether I truly conceived on that night or not, I can't really tell. But that was the sweetest memory I have, so I truly hoped that it was at that moment that I'd be blessed with a child. Adeline then looked at Lux with fondness. She and the half-elf didn't say anything, but even without words, both of them seemed to know what the other was thinking. A few minutes later, the beautiful elf closed her eyes, and a sorrowful expression appeared on her face. Adeline took a few deep breaths in order to regain her calm and continue her story. When Vincent turned 20 years old, he heard that his father had acquired a terminal illness and was on his deathbed, Adeline said. Knowing that this might probably be the last time that he would see his father alive, Vincent returned to the Finn Kingdom in order to see him. No one barred him, and even the crown prince, whom he didn't get along with, allowed him to see the king before he breathed his last. I was there with him as he held his father's hand. The two talked, and his father departed the world with a smile. Adeline's face then hardened as a strand of killing intent oozed out from her body. It was also on that day when the crown prince showed his true colors and tried to capture me by force, Adeline said as her body shook with anger. It seemed that he had long wanted me to become his plaything, and he was only holding back because he was afraid that his father still cared for his bastard son. But after his death, he no longer feared anyone, for he was the next in line for the throne. Out of desperation, Vincent used his trump card. No one knew that he carried an artifact given to him by the king as a means to protect himself. In order to allow me to escape, he summoned the avatar of a saint. A great battle took place within the royal palace. However, an avatar wasn't strong enough to fight against the saint who was protecting Vincent's brother. Even so, we still managed to escape that place, but my beloved was mortally wounded. He drew his last breath in my arms. But before that, he asked me to return to Solais and never step foot in Elysium again. Even though he was dying, he still worried for my safety. I buried him in the flower field where we often spend our time together. He said that he wanted to be surrounded by flowers so that, even if I was not around to see him, there would always be flowers on his grave. A tear slid down the side of Adeline's face, and her lip trembled. Seeing this, Aurora stood up and gave the older lady a hug. Lux, on the other hand, closed his eyes. The Finn Kingdom was a kingdom bordering the Vahan Empire. With his current strength, it would only take him a day or two to reach his destination. After Adeline regained her composure, she stood up and hugged Lux. The half-elf didn't resist and hugged his biological mother back. Adeline thought that she had no more tears to shed, but the moment Lux hugged her back, her heart felt like it was breaking. The beautiful elf cried in Lux's arms, soaking his clothes with bitter tears. Adeline didn't know if her tears were coming from the loss of her husband, the loss of her child, or the possibility of reuniting with the child, whom everyone, including her, thought to be dead. It was even possible that it was all those reasons combined. Even so, Adeline didn't hold back the sadness and the heartache that she was feeling and let her emotions flow freely like a raging river that had swelled after continuous days of rain. Lux patted the beautiful elf's back in order to help her calm down. Unfortunately, this only made Adeline cry harder, making the half-elf feel helpless. Half an hour later, Adeline finally quieted down. She remained in Lux's embrace as if remembering a time when a similar pair of hands held her close and made her feel like the happiest woman in the world. A few minutes later, Adeline fell asleep in Lux's arms. The half-elf carried the beautiful elf like a princess and brought her back to her room. He then laid her down on the bed and asked Aurora to look after her while he pondered a few things on his own. Technically, Adeline's and Vincent's child was already dead. When Lux's soul arrived in Solais, only a fragment of his soul remained. If not for the fact that there was a vessel that could house his weakened soul at that time, his soul might have disappeared and ceased to exist. Perhaps it was just a coincidence or a whim of fate. But it didn't change the fact that Lux only had a second chance at life because of Adeline's baby. As if feeling his thoughts, an ache washed over his body. It was as if his body was crying due to the sadness of his birth mother at the loss of her child. Understood, Lux said softly as he pressed his right hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat. I'll avenge our mother. I promise to make those who hurt her and your father pay. After making this promise, the ache he was feeling disappeared, and his body felt light. For a brief moment, Lux thought he heard the sound of a baby's laughter echoing inside his ears. Although the ache in his heart disappeared, he felt a different kind of pain. A pain that plucked the strings of his soul, making a single tear stream down the side of his face. Okay, Lux muttered. I will also visit your father. Leave everything to me. Several minutes passed as Lux stood at the top of the tree where Adeline's house was built. He gazed upon the moon in the sky as he contemplated his next course of action. However, one thing was clear. When morning came, he would take Adeline and Aurora back to Elysium. They would pay a visit to the Finn Kingdom and settle the debt that was long overdue. Lux knew that a happily ever after may not always be possible. But who was he? He was the Necromancer of Heaven. As long as it was within his powers and the right conditions were met, anything was possible. Asmodeus, Lux called out the Lich King, who would do anything for his sake. Yes, master. Asmodeus bowed his head respectfully. Go to the Finn Kingdom and gather information, Lux ordered. I don't care what method you use. I just want to see the results. The Lich King smiled and his eyes twinkled in excitement. Yes, my liege, Asmodeus replied. I'll pave the path for your revenge. Without another word, the Lich King turned into a black mist and traveled to the starry skies. His destination was the Finn Kingdom, and Asmodeus would stop at nothing to ensure that his master's wishes would be met in full. When Adeline opened her eyes, she found herself gazing at the familiar ceiling of her room. However, it didn't take long before she realized that she wasn't the only one lying on her bed. Sleeping beside her was a young lady whose beauty surpassed her own. Aurora was sleeping peacefully, hugging Adeline. The elf couldn't help but admire this young lady, who was capable of charming boys and girls alike. Glancing through her window, she noticed that the sky was still dark and dawn was still a few hours away. She was still feeling sleepy, and Aurora's warmth made her feel very comfortable. Adeline had been alone for nearly 2 decades after the death of her child. Although her parents wanted her to live with them in the elven capital, she insisted on living on her own and remained in Moss Village. She spent her days taking care of the orphanage's children who had lost their parents after they died or went missing in Elysium. Elves were a race that was highly sought out by slave traders due to their beauty and grace. For this reason, they were not advised to travel alone in Elysium and to always travel with a group of their own kind. It was because Adeline refused to do this in the past that led to her being captured and auctioned away. Fortunately, the one who bought her, Vincent, was not a bad person. This saved her from suffering a fate worse than death, which was becoming the plaything of a noble who would show her off to his friends like a trophy during the day and use her as a bed warmer at night. Vincent would often sleep with her every night, but he never forced her to do anything. At most, he would only hug her like a pillow and fall asleep in a minute or two. Perhaps, missing her beloved, Adeline wrapped her arms around Aurora and pulled her close. The young lady was in a deep sleep, but she still burrowed her head subconsciously into Adeline's chest because it felt soft and smelled good. "I know that it is impossible, but I can't help thinking about it," Adeline thought as she hugged the young lady in his arms. "I don't want to hope, but if Lux is truly my son, then Aurora is my future daughter-in-law." Adeline's gaze softened as she looked at the young lady in his arms. She had been touched when Aurora lent her shoulder for her to cry on earlier, and it gave her a good impression of the young lady. A few minutes later, Adeline closed her eyes to sleep. She dreamed of enjoying a picnic with Lux and Aurora as if they were truly a family. The beautiful elf wasn't aware that, despite the fact that she was having a good dream, tears streamed down her eyes in the real world, soaking Aurora's hair with the warmth of her tears. A few hours later, Adeline woke up feeling refreshed. It had been many years since she last felt like this, and she knew that this was thanks to her 2 guests who were currently staying inside her house. The smell of something delicious reached her nose, making her stomach growl in response. Aurora, who was still sleeping a few seconds ago, opened her eyes and looked at Adeline in a daze. A second later, the beautiful elf's stomach growled a second time, making her face turn beet red due to embarrassment. "Good morning, Aurora," Adeline said in order to hide the fact that her stomach was growling. "Did you have a good sleep?" "Yes," Aurora replied with a smile. "I slept well since it felt like I was sleeping with my deceased mother. It felt good." Adeline felt sad after hearing that Aurora's mother was no longer in this world. It triggered her maternal instincts, making her kiss the young lady's forehead before patting her head affectionately. "Then why don't you always sleep beside me from this point onwards?" Adeline proposed. "That way, both of us will be able to get a good night's sleep together." "Sounds good," Aurora smiled. "I'd love that." Adeline was about to say more, but her stomach chose this opportunity to complain a third time, making the words she was about to say stop in her throat. At that moment, the 2 ladies heard someone knocking on the door. "Breakfast is ready," Lux said. "Come and get it." The 2 beautiful ladies glanced at each other and smiled. They then got out of bed and joined Lux to eat breakfast. "I didn't know you were a good cook, Lux," Adeline said. "This is wonderful." Lux chuckled because he knew that Adeline was just exaggerating. He merely cooked sunny-side-up eggs and cured meat, so there was nothing special about it. After eating breakfast, Adeline took Aurora to a nearby spring so they could bathe together. Lux stayed in the house and waited for the 2 ladies to finish. He wasn't in a hurry to leave Moss Village because he decided to stay one more day before returning to Elysium. Aurora looked very happy to spend time with Adeline, so he decided to let them enjoy each other's company for the time being. Technically, the beautiful elf would become Aurora's mother-in-law once the 2 of them got married. He thought that this was a good idea for the 2 of them to form a bond early, nurturing their future relationship as in-laws. After a night of thinking, Lux finally decided to embrace the identity that was granted to him by fate. While it was true that he wasn't really Adeline's child, the fact remained that his vessel belonged to her baby. He even felt that the remnant spirit of Adeline's child, which still lingered inside his body, wished for him to take over his identity and become the beautiful elf's family. He didn't really sleep and simply meditated all night, trying to better understand how he should proceed with his relationship with Adeline. At first, he only wanted to see her to bring closure to his past. But after hearing her story, he knew that he couldn't stand idly and remain on the fence. He was not the only one who wanted to look for closure. Adeline was also looking for it. She had lost her husband. She had lost her child. And now, she spent her days in solitude. For a long-lived race, this kind of lifestyle was considered torture. Nearly 2 decades had passed, yet Adeline was still unable to let go of the 2 people she had lost. If she truly had the ability to move on, by now, she would have already remarried and formed a new family. But she didn't do that. She clung to the feelings inside her heart, making her unable to find happiness in life. A sigh escaped Lux's lips as he leaned on the sofa and closed his eyes. He had already made his choice, and he would abide by his decision. At that exact moment, Asmodeus' voice reached his ears. "Master, I have a report to make," Asmodeus said. "Okay," Lux replied. The Lich King then began to tell him all the information that he had gathered in Elysium, making the half-elf frown. "That's the end of my report, Master," Asmodeus stated, "but I will continue to gather information." "Good job, Asmodeus." Lux commended his loyal servant. "We'll be there in a day or 2. So, continue your mission." "Yes, Master." Asmodeus said nothing more as he returned to his undercover work in the Finn Kingdom. The more Asmodeus investigated the current king of the Finn Kingdom, the more disgusted he became. He couldn't believe that someone like him was able to remain in power for so many years, with no one challenging his rule. Perhaps there had been a few who did challenge the current king in the past. However, with the backing of the corrupt nobles by his side, these rebels were snuffed out before they could even grow, allowing the vile king, who was sitting on the throne, to continue his debauchery. This king's days are numbered, Asmodeus thought. Of all the people that he offended, he chose to offend my master's parents. His death will certainly not be swift. The Lich King's lips curled up into an evil smile as he gazed at the royal palace in the distance. If he wanted to, he could probably kidnap the king without too much effort. But he didn't want to risk it since there were 2 saints protecting the kingdom. He was afraid that if he made a move, the king would go into hiding, making it more difficult to capture him. For the time being, he silently continued gathering information on who might be the next suitable ruler of the kingdom. In all honesty, Asmodeus wanted to propose that his master just take over the kingdom as its king. He had the bloodline of the Finn royal family flowing inside his veins, so his legitimacy was secured. Though, even without that royal bloodline, Lux could still take over the kingdom using sheer might. Even though the neighbors of the Finn kingdom, like the Vaihan Empire, might be alarmed by the sudden changes that would be happening soon, Asmodeus didn't give a hoot about what they thought. If they had a problem with his master, he would not hesitate to march his undead legion into their capital cities and drag their kings off of their thrones. That way, Lux would not rule a single kingdom, but instead a vast empire, with countless subjects waiting for his beck and call. "Keep dreaming, Asmodeus," Asmodeus said bitterly. "Master will never do something like that." The Lich King sighed before shaking his head. "I wonder if I can convince Eiko to become an empress?" Asmodeus thought. "Although Master doesn't like to rule, I have a feeling that Eiko might be willing to do it. If only she was just a bit older, it would have been perfect." What Asmodeus didn't know was that the baby slime that he was thinking fondly of was currently humming a happy tune as her Boom Boom pirate crew destroyed all the opposing forces in the Ford Federation. The pirates, as well as the families, who longed to overthrow the 3 great families and the 10 prestigious families of the Ford Federation, were all gathering under her banner. The remaining forces of the families who once ruled the island nation with an iron fist were either fleeing to different nations or surrendering to their enemies. None of them were powerful enough to face Eiko's might, especially after she had turned the supremes of the three great families into her underlings. The flags of the Boom Boom pirate crew fluttered across the islands of the Ford Federation. If Asmodeus was able to see them, he would probably ask the baby slime to give him a few of her flags so that he could also plant them in the Finn Kingdom. Eiko was Lux's daughter. Since she was family, then she could rightfully rule the Finn Kingdom. What? A baby slime, who is considered a monster, didn't have the right to rule a human kingdom? Who said that? Blackfire would like to offer you a life insurance package before it slaps you to oblivion. Huh. Kings and emperors would refuse to recognize her as empress? Wait a minute. We have a few supremes and demigods who would like to talk to you about the meaning of life. Unlike her papa, Eiko was a battle junkie who wouldn't hesitate to start making things explode left and right. If the baby slime was aware that the divine army had bullied Lux while she was away, she would have probably teleported to Lux's side and summoned Poseidon to start an all-out war against the divine army of light. So what if they had one of the pillars of eternity? Eiko had one too, and her golden anchor could drown countless cities in seawater if she wished for it to happen. Fortunately, the Lich King had no idea that Eiko was in possession of such power. If he knew, he would happily collaborate with the baby slime and conquer vast swaths of land, making her the empress of the biggest empire in the world. Of course, whether Lux would allow such a thing to happen was another story. Elven Spring, Lux has 8 lovers? Adeline asked in a surprised tone as she washed Aurora's back. It almost became 9 a few days ago, Aurora commented. However, I believe that it will only be a matter of time before Princess Anastasia becomes one of my sisters. I can still believe that Lux is capable of having 2 dwarf princesses as fiancées, Adeline said. But 2 dragon princesses as his lovers as well? I don't know if I should commend him or caution him for daring to do such an outrageous thing. He is just an A-ranker. Isn't he afraid of Supremes pinching him like a bug? Aurora giggled as Adeline continued to wash her back. Believe it or not, he managed to do it. But please keep this as a secret for now. If this gets out, things might get complicated. Then why did you tell me this? Adeline inquired. Are you not afraid that I will spread this information to others? You won't do that, Aurora replied with confidence. You won't do anything that might bring harm to Lux. How can you be sure of that? We've only been together for a day. Woman's intuition. Adeline didn't know if he should laugh or cry after hearing Aurora's casual reply. Have you forgotten? Adeline lightly patted Aurora's head. I'm a woman too. Also, you made a mistake. The beautiful elf moved closer to whisper something in Aurora's ears. You're still a young lady, and not yet a woman, Adeline whispered. I can tell that you still haven't done it with Lux. Aurora's face reddened after hearing the beautiful elf's words. She didn't know that Adeline specialized in nature magic, so the elf was able to tell these kinds of things with a single glance. I am not in a hurry to do it with him, Aurora stuttered. Really? Adeline smiled. Well, I guess that's fine too. Letting nature take its course is how things should be. The beautiful elf wanted to know more about Lux, so she asked Aurora many questions. There were a few questions that she wasn't able to answer. However, she had the guild chat. Aurora didn't hesitate to ask these questions in the chat room where all of Lux's lovers were. Iris, who heard her questions, asked Aurora why she was asking these kinds of questions. Since the pink-haired beauty didn't want to have secrets with her sisters, she mentioned that she was currently with someone whom she believed to be Lux's biological mother. The young lady didn't expect her words to instantly cause a commotion among Lux's fiancés and lovers, who started to interrogate her and ask her where she and Lux were currently at. I should have gone with them, Iris muttered while rubbing her forehead. I missed the chance to meet Lux's mother first. Kai, who was seated beside her, was also feeling regretful. Lux didn't say where he was going with Aurora, so the majority of them thought that he was just taking her out on a date. Among Lux's lovers, Aurora was the only one whom Lux hadn't embraced yet. Because of this, everyone encouraged her to spend some time with Lux alone and even told her that if she saw an opportunity, she shouldn't hesitate and go for it. Although Iris and Kai were a bit disappointed that they weren't able to meet Adeline like Aurora, the two of them answered the questions that their sister had asked of them. Of course, They made Aurora promise them to do everything in her power to convince Lux to make Adeline one of his guild members. That way, the elf could teleport to Lux's guild headquarters, giving them all the opportunity to meet his mother for the first time. A day passed peacefully in Moss Village. None of the elves dared to say a word about the half-elf who was currently living in Adeline's house. They were afraid of offending the Dracolic that could kill them all with a sneeze. Because of this, they tolerated Lux's existence. Whatever they thought of him, they kept this inside their hearts and didn't say anything out in the open, knowing what could happen if they were overheard. On the second day, Lux asked Adeline if she could accompany him to the Finn Kingdom. When the beautiful elf heard about Lux's intention of visiting the kingdom where she had many happy but also painful memories, she didn't know what to say. Truth be told, she was afraid of returning since the current king might still want to capture her. However, after Lux assured her that everything was going to be fine, Adeline decided to trust him. She knew that the half-elf had the Dracolic with him, so their safety was assured. Of course, this was on the condition that there were only 2 saints in the Finn Kingdom. It had been nearly 20 years since she had escaped from that place, and she hadn't heard any news about it since then. Although she was still afraid, the hands holding her own gave her strength. Lux's and Aurora's hands made her feel that, as long as she was with them, she would be able to face the fears that she had long buried inside her heart. "Village chief, we will be leaving now," Lux said with a smile. "I might visit this place in the future again, so make sure to treat me nicely when that happens." "Oh, of course," Amar replied. "You are welcome to visit us anytime." The village head didn't really want to see Lux again, but what could he do? He needed to part with him on good terms to ensure that he and the other villagers would be able to keep on living. Adeline also bid her goodbye to the village head, and then guided Lux and Aurora to the teleportation gate, which was located a kilometer away from Moss Village. Since all of them were rankers, it didn't even take them a minute to reach their destination. The half-elf could sense that Adeline was feeling anxious as she started to set the coordinates of the teleportation gate. It had been so long since she had gone to Elysium, and her hands were shaking as she adjusted the dials of the teleportation gate. Lux sighed in his heart, but he didn't say anything. He wanted to help Adeline confront her heart demons by going to the Finn Kingdom. Also, he wanted to see if a certain possibility existed. "Are both of you ready?" Adeline asked. "Yes," Lux replied. Aurora nodded her head in affirmation. Taking a deep breath, the beautiful elf activated the teleportation gate, sending her and the 2 teenagers to Elysium. When the 3 of them regained their vision, they found themselves in the plaza of a bustling town. They were currently in the capital city of the Finn Kingdom, which went by the name Crowl City. "Lux, if possible, can you and Aurora please accompany me somewhere first?" Adeline asked. "There is a place that I want to visit." "Of course," Lux replied. "Lead the way." Adeline smiled. Then she led the 2 teenagers toward the west gate of the city. As the 3 of them walked side by side, the people on the street couldn't help but stare in their direction. A half-elf and an elf traveling in the Finn Kingdom was a very rare occurrence. In fact, the only elves and half-elves in the city were slaves. But, since the 2 of them weren't wearing any collars, everyone felt that they were merely ignorant tourists who unknowingly entered the lion's den. Aside from the 2 of them, the people also noticed Aurora. A beauty like her could bring the downfall of a nation, so almost all the men couldn't help but look at her as she walked by. In short, the 3 of them were pure eye candy, and their arrival had already alerted the various slave traders inside the city who were always on the lookout for new products to sell. These people also had connections to the high-ranking nobles, serving as their protectors. But the black market, which hosted these underground auctions, had the king as their backer. Although it had been nearly 2 decades since they had seen her, the elders of the black market recognized Adeline. They knew that the king had wanted her since he had first seen her, so they made sure to report their discovery right away. "So, she has returned," King Avar muttered after hearing the elder of the black market. "And you are saying that there is another beautiful lady aside from her?" "Yes, your majesty," the elder reported. "Although I haven't personally seen her, my right-hand man attests that she is even more beautiful than Adeline. She seemed to be in her late teens as well." But he also noticed something else. King Avar arched an eyebrow. What else did your subordinate notice? Lightnovel the elder smiled. These two beauties are being accompanied by a red-headed half-elf. A half-elf? King Avar narrowed his gaze. So, are you telling me that Adeline and that girl are his lovers? That possibility exists, but that is not the main concern, Your Majesty, the elder replied. He looks quite similar to your deceased brother, Vincent. If I have to make a bold guess, the half-elf might be his son with Adeline. Ivar's face contorted with rage as he slammed his fist on the armrest of his throne. Guards, summon Lennox and Hassan, King Ivar ordered. Tell them to come see me as soon as possible. Also, call forth cages as well. This is an order. Yes, Your Majesty. The two royal guards bowed their heads and left the throne room immediately. Where are they headed? King Ivar asked the elder of the black market in a cold tone. I sure hope that you took the initiative to have your men follow them. I did, Your Majesty, the elder replied. They have exited the west gate and seem to be headed to Starfall Valley. King Ivar smiled. Good. She managed to escape once, but she will not be able to escape a second time. The king of the kingdom of Finn sneered as he thought about the half-elf who was accompanying the two beauties. If you really are his son, then all I can say is that you are stupid for sending yourself here to my kingdom, King Ivar thought. The king smiled evilly because he couldn't wait to get his hands on the beautiful elf whom he wished to pin down on his bed ever since he had first laid his eyes on her. As for the other beauty, she could serve as the main course after I've had my fill of Adeline, King Ivar mused. It seems that today is my lucky day. One of the shadows inside the throne room swayed a bit, but no one was paying attention to it. At the same time, somewhere outside the city, the corner of the half-elf's face curled up into a smile. It's good to know that you're as bad as the reports say. Lux sneered in his heart. I just hope that you don't break easily. It will be a shame if you didn't suffer enough after what Adeline and Vincent have been through because of you. The half-elf looked at the beautiful elf in front of him, walking side by side with Aurora. Both ladies were chatting happily as they took a stroll towards Starfall Valley. The two beautiful ladies were unaware that the king of the kingdom of Finn had already summoned his three strongest subordinates in order to capture them. But even if they knew, they would simply think that the king was stupid for doing such a thing. After all, why would they even step foot inside his kingdom if they had no way to defend against his lustful intentions? Wasn't that just asking for trouble? Little did King Ivar know, he wasn't the only one mobilizing their subordinates right at this moment. Asmodeus, who had stayed in the city to gather information about the king and his misdeeds, had already set things into motion. His master had come here for revenge, and he would serve that revenge on a cold platter, which would shake the entirety of the Finn kingdom to its very core. I'm sorry. I haven't visited you for a long time, Adeline said softly as she rested her hand on a tomb that was surrounded by countless flowers. I hope you forgive me, Vincent. The beautiful elf tried to keep her face from crumpling by biting her lip, but it didn't work. Soon, her body shook as she tried her best to stop her tears from falling. This time, Aurora didn't move to console her and simply watched from behind. She fully understood what Adeline was going through since she felt the same thing when she visited her mother's tomb after years of being imprisoned in the inner sanctum of the Pantheon of Exile. Lux pulled his lover into his embrace and wrapped his arms around her. His gaze, however, was focused on the crying elf and the red-headed man, who was also bawling his eyes out. Adeline, I miss you so much, the red-headed young man, who seemed to be in his early 20s, cried as he tried to embrace the beautiful elf with his ghostly hands. Even though his hands would pass through her body, the young man still kept trying to comfort the woman he loved. Of course, this person was none other than Adeline's lover, and Lux's biological father, Vincent. As if sensing Lux's gaze, the young man glared in his direction. Who are you? Vincent shouted. Don't tell me that you seduced my wife, using her loneliness as a way to worm yourself into her heart. You bastard! How dare you taint my Adeline? If you get her pregnant, I will haunt you for eternity. The ghost then shifted his attention to his lover and kissed her forehead. Darling, why did you replace me with this snot-nosed half-elf? Vincent asked Adeline, knowing that the latter couldn't hear him. Although I admit that he is almost as good-looking as me, that doesn't mean he is better than me in bed. Don't give in to the temptation. I bet that his is only 2 inches long." Lux almost coughed out blood after hearing Vincent's words. Originally, he wanted to help the bastard reunite with his mom, but after being cursed like this, he was very tempted to torture his soul instead. "Hey you!" Vincent flew towards Lux and glared at him. "I know you can see me. You bastard. Don't you dare lay your hands on my wife. I will fight you to the death if you do." Vincent even tried to punch Lux's face, but his hands only went through him. Unlike specters who had a corporeal form that could affect the world of the living, Vincent's soul was too weak. The fact that he was able to retain his consciousness after so many years proved that he was one of those earthbound spirits who couldn't find rest due to the regrets that they had in life. Out of curiosity, Lux decided to ask the raging redhead some questions. "How are you still able to retain your sentience after nearly 2 decades?" Lux asked. "How? I will tell you how." Vincent snorted. "How can I possibly cross over when I know that my beautiful wife might get snatched by that bastard Avar? If only I knew that he was targeting Adeline, I would have killed him in the past." Vincent's words were filled with hate and regret. When Adeline told him that she was pregnant with his child, he felt as if he was the happiest man in the world. However, after discovering that his father was on his deathbed, he decided to see him one last time. Everything was fine until his father drew his last breath. The moment the king died, Crown Prince Avar immediately ordered the guards and a saint of the kingdom to capture them. Vincent and Adeline had to fight tooth and nail in order to escape the royal palace. They had succeeded, but Vincent suffered a mortal injury, which led to his untimely death. His greatest regret was not being there with Adeline to see the birth of his child, which was one of the reasons that prevented him from crossing over to the other side. Adeline, who regained her composure, glanced at Lux and noticed that he was looking at something else. He could see the half-elf's expression change from time to time, which confused her at first. However, after remembering Lux's profession, her eyes widened in shock as she immediately grabbed hold of his arm. "See, can you see him?" Adeline asked. "Can you see Vincent?" "Yes," Lux replied. "Do you want to see him as well?" He didn't hide the fact that he was a necromancer from Adeline, so he didn't beat around the bush and came clean. Originally, he planned to let Blackfire swallow Vincent and keep it as a future surprise to Adeline. However, Vincent cursing the current king of the Finn Kingdom was so amusing that he momentarily forgot to capture his soul.
Yes.
Adeline almost clung to Lux, which made the annoying ghost raise his middle finger at the half-elf. Lux nodded and covered Adeline's eyes with his right hand. "Bastard! Don't touch my woman." Vincent was once again enraged and started to throw punches at the half-elf, but all of it went through the latter. Half a minute later, Lux removed his hands from Adeline's eyes. Instead of seeing him first, Adeline heard him first. Although it had been many years since she last heard her husband's voice, it was impossible for the beautiful elf to forget it. "Vincent, is it really you?" Adeline covered her mouth with her hand as she held back the torrent of emotions that were rising from her heart. "Yes, my love," Vincent replied as he hovered in front of Adeline. "It is me, your husband, the love of your life, your prince, and the other half that holds your heart. Please, don't let this half-elf seduce you. I don't want to wear a green hat even if I am already dead." Lux had also covered Aurora's eyes with his hand, giving her the ability to see his father, who was busy insulting him from the side. "Is he really your father?" Aurora whispered in an amused tone. "Technically, he is," Lux replied. "Technically? MMM. Although Vincent wasn't really his father, he was his body's biological father. "Well, I can see the similarities between you and him," Aurora whispered. "He is like a more unrestrained version of you. Do you plan to revive him?" "Yes," Lux replied. "Although it was my intention to visit his grave, I didn't raise my hopes about being able to do so since it had been many years since he died. I didn't think that he would be like your mother, who was able to retain her consciousness even after so many years." Lux paused whatever he was going to say next, but it was already too late. He hadn't mentioned anything to Aurora about her mother's soul recovering inside Blackfire, The half-elf planned to surprise his lover once he found a suitable body for her mother, who was now able to take a corporeal form and affect reality. But seeing that Aurora's eyes had already become moist and were on the verge of tears, he knew that she wanted to see if what he said was the truth. "Blackfire," Lux said softly. A moment later, the black coffin appeared a few meters away from Aurora. Its lid then slid open, making the young lady cover her lips with both hands. Soon, Queen Bianca appeared, who immediately walked towards her daughter and gave her a tight hug, making Aurora burst into tears. Lux sighed as he looked at this emotional scene, which happened due to a slip of his tongue. Blackfire nudged his head with the side of its body, as if blaming its master for being a party pooper. "Sorry, my bad," Lux replied as he raised both of his hands in surrender. He had no excuse for what he did. But after seeing how happy Aurora was after seeing her mother, he didn't regret it either. But before this emotional scene could continue, Lux frowned as he turned his gaze towards the location of the city of Krull. He could sense the presence of 3 powerful individuals, accompanied by several rankers, who were headed in their direction. Took them long enough, Lux thought, before ordering Blackfire to devour Vincent's soul for the time being. He knew that things were going to get a little bit messy, and he didn't want his biological father's soul to disintegrate in a clash of powers. Queen Bianca also entered Blackfire because she knew that her daughter was in good hands. Her soul had recovered a bit, but it was still very fragile. In order to spend more time with Aurora, she decided to go back inside Blackfire and wait until things settled down. Avernus materialized beside Lux and crossed his arms over his chest. Blackfire did the same as it faced the direction the 3 saints were coming from, who would soon regret their decision for coming to disturb its mistress' happy moment. Adeline's expression contorted with rage the moment she saw one of the saints who landed a few meters away from her. The name of the saint was Lennox, and he was the same saint who had tried to capture her and Vincent the moment the king breathed his last. If not for him, she and her husband would be spending their lives in seclusion, living a peaceful life away from the politics of the Finn kingdom. Lennox knew that Vincent would protect her with everything he had, so instead of targeting the bastard prince back then, who was protected by the avatar of a saint, he put his all into going after the beautiful elf instead. This forced Vincent to use his body to shield his beloved, which caused his mortal injury at that time. "You bastard! Why are you here?" Adeline shouted in anger. "Mind your words, Adeline," Lennox replied with a smile. "The only bastard I know is long dead, and that is your husband. As to why I am here, do you even need to ask that question? Of course, it is to bring you to King Avar's bed, where you rightfully belong. While I'm at it, it seems that I will also be adding one more beauty to his harem." Lennox's gaze landed on Aurora, and he had to admit that the reports were right. She was more beautiful than Adeline, and he had a feeling that the young lady was still a chaste maiden. "It will be a pity to let Avar have this maiden first," Lennox mused. "I guess I'll enjoy her for a day or two before handing her to the king. I'm sure he won't mind having second-hand goods, since he will indulge himself with Adeline first." Lennox laughed internally as he looked at Aurora with satisfaction. Adeline used her body to shield Aurora from Lennox's lustful gaze. Since the angelic beauty was Lux's lover, she would do everything in her power to protect her, even if she had to fight against a saint. The elf also recognized the other saint who went by the name Hassan. He was referred to as the King's Blade, for he would kill anyone who threatened the king's rule. Light symbol behind the 2 saints were several high rankers, who had now moved to circle their targets, giving them no place to escape. Avernus, who was standing beside Lux, suddenly extended his hand and grabbed something in the space beside him. A moment later, a man materialized out of thin air, struggling to escape from Avernus' grasp. "Very sneaky," Avernus said with a smile, "but not sneaky enough." Adeline's gaze locked on the man who was currently being held by Avernus in a vice grip. She didn't recognize him since he was someone who migrated to the kingdom of Finn just a few years ago. This person's name was Kejus, and he was a pseudo-saint who once belonged to the Vehan Empire. He had offended a high-ranking noble in the empire, so he decided to escape. He went to the Finn kingdom and asked King Avar for asylum. The king readily agreed, seeing that the man was a pseudo-saint. If given enough time, Keijus would also become a saint, allowing the kingdom of Fin to have 3 saints as its protectors. Keijus specialized in stealth attacks. His target was the red-headed half-elf. He didn't pay any attention to Avernus because the Dracolic had hidden his rank and only unleashed the presence of an Argonaut-ranked monster. Lux had ordered him to not scare away their guests since he had a few questions to ask them. "Let him go, fiend," Lennox said in a casual tone. "If you do, I will give you a quick and painless death." The Dracolic chuckled after hearing the saint's threat. "I'm afraid that it will take more than killing me to kill me," Avernus replied. "Also, you don't have the ability to kill me." Lennox frowned after hearing Avernus' reply. He didn't really mind whether Keijus died or not since they weren't close. The only reason why he even bothered to speak out was because Keijus was a useful pawn, willing to do menial chores for the king. "Adeline, it is best if you and the girl come with us peacefully," Hassan, who also didn't pay any attention to Keijus, spoke up. "This invitation also extends to you, boy. If you don't want to get hurt, you should just obey and allow us to take you without resisting." Lux nodded his head in satisfaction because the saints were acting like the third-rate villains that they were. He was just wondering if Avar's subordinates would act according to the script that he thought in his head. So far, they didn't disappoint him. "Tell me one thing before I beat the crap out of the 2 of you," Lux said as he looked at Lennox and Hassan with a frown. "Why haven't the 2 of you usurped the throne for yourselves? Ivar is a weakling, and with your strength, you could have ruled this kingdom easily." "Oh, now you're trying to sow dissension?" Lennox arched an eyebrow. "Unfortunately, it will not work. While it is true that the king is weak, no one can sit upon the throne of the Finn kingdom unless they have the bloodline of their founder." "You talk too much, Lennox," Hassan frowned. "Why are you saying these things to these people?" Lennox smirked. "Why? Because even if they know, they wouldn't be able to do anything about it." Hassan shook his head in disappointment before raising his hand. Capturing these people was beneath him, and if possible, he didn't want to dirty his hands. Because of this, he was fine with letting the king's subordinates do the dirty work for him. "Capture them," Hassan ordered. "If they resist, just knock them out." The Blade of the Kingdom simply wanted to end this farce as fast as possible, so he no longer delayed the inevitable. Lux wanted to ask more questions, but since their enemies were about to apprehend them, he decided to set aside his inquiry and deal with the fools who didn't know who they were messing with. Blackfire opened the lid of its coffin and summoned Shaun and Maeve. The Juggernaut of Agartha and the Oracle easily subdued the high-rankers and knocked them unconscious without too much effort. "Capture those 2, Lux pointed at Lennox and Hassan with a sneer on his face. "If they resist, just knock them out." After sensing that the 2 newcomers were actually saints, Lennox and Hassan immediately knew that they were tough opponents. Because of this, Lennox moved to capture Adeline and Aurora, intending to use them as hostages. However, before he could even get close to the 2 beautiful ladies, the King of Exiles and his subordinates appeared in front of Lennox, blocking his path. Lennox hurriedly backed away before looking at Lux in surprise. "Who are you?" Lennox shouted. "Why are you interfering in the affairs of the Finn kingdom?" The half-elf didn't even bother answering the saint's question and snapped his fingers. The King of Exiles and his subordinates moved in unison to apprehend Lennox. Since he was dealing with many saints at once, the lustful saint decided to escape using an escape talisman that would teleport him to a random place that was 1,000 miles away from where he was. Unfortunately, even after using the talisman, nothing happened, which made his face turn pale. "I can't get enough of seeing the looks of our enemies when they realize that they cannot escape," Hannah, who materialized behind Lux, said with a smirk. Hassan, who had also done the same thing, glared at the fox lady before running away in haste. He already knew that they no longer had any chance of winning, so he decided to use everything in his power to escape his current circumstances. But his attempt was futile. He wasn't even able to take 10 steps before Avernus appeared in front of him and smashed his face on the ground. After seeing that the 2 saints were apprehended, Lux glanced in Adeline's direction and asked her a question. "Adeline, how do you want to deal with these people?" Lux inquired. "I want them to suffer," Adeline replied in a heartbeat. her words filled with killing intent. I want them to feel the suffering I've felt for nearly 2 decades. Lux gave the beautiful elf a slight nod before snapping his fingers. Cries of pain reverberated in the surroundings as Lux's subordinates crushed the arms and legs of their enemies, crippling them and further lowering their chances of escaping. He had no intention of letting these people have a swift and painless death. Since his mother wanted them to suffer, he would make them suffer. However, he didn't intend to do it personally. Asmodeus had already laid down the groundwork for their punishment. The only thing he needed to do now was to return to the city of Kral and drag the king off his throne, completing Asmodeus' plan of giving Adeline the revenge that she had wished for the past years of her life.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.